Ethics Untangled is made by the Idea Centre at the University of Leeds. It's a podcast about the difficult ethical questions we face in everyday life. In each episode, I interview someone, usually a philosopher, who's spent time thinking through one of these questions, and we try between us to work out what's going on. Unjust enrichment is a distinctive, and some might say, weird area of law. It's supposed to cover cases in which someone acquires a benefit of some kind at the expense of another person in a way that's unjust and which leads to a requirement for restitution. It's not the same as fraud or theft, partly because the person who has been unjustly enriched might never have intended to be enriched. But it has proven surprisingly difficult for legal scholars to say exactly what it is, or precisely what links all the cases that are usually brought together under the heading of unjust enrichment, which has led some to call for it to be abolished. Nonetheless, Duncan Sheehan, Professor of Business Law at the University of Leeds, does think it's a thing, and thinks it should continue to be a thing. And in this conversation, he explains why. Welcome to the podcast, Duncan.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
And we're here to talk about unjust enrichment. So unjust enrichment is a legal concept. So one example that came to mind when I was thinking about unjust enrichment and reading your paper is I was once paid a month's salary by my employer that I wasn't entitled to by mistake. Essentially, I think, payroll just forgot to put some kind of marker on my account or whatever, and the payment just went through when it shouldn't have done. Now, obviously, because I'm, as honest as the day is long and an ethicist, I felt I had to tell them and give the money back. But if I hadn't, if I'd kind of ignored it and tried to pretend that I didn't know about it or just hoped that they wouldn't notice, would that have been an example of unjust enrichment?
Yes. So, there's two scenarios here, Jim. So the first one is you ignore it, you don't know anything about it, you don't look at your bank account, the university, I assume it's the university, comes knocking and saying, sorry, Jim, we've made a mistake. Can we have that money back? And there they've made a mistake, as you say, and those sort of mistaken payments happen all the time, where you get, say, a bank making double payments because some clerk forgets that the first clerk's made the payment, or universities or other employers wrongly pay out salary, or for that matter, the government wrongly pays out social security benefits. These sort of things happen all the time. And because of the mistake by the payer, that mistake justifies them saying to you, please give us the money back. And if you don't, then they take you to court, and the court says, give it back. The other scenario, which I can think of, is where you don't realise it's a mistake. You think you're entitled to it. And yes, the university is entitled to come and say, can we have the money back? But if you've spent all or some of the money on, let's say, baby stuff for your new child that you wouldn't necessarily have bought otherwise, then you can say, I too have made a mistake. I thought I was entitled to the money. I've changed my position in legal terminology on the basis of my entitlement. So you can't have all of it back, but you can have the half of it remaining back.
Right. And is that why we talk about this as being unjust enrichment? So it's not that I've stolen the money, it's not that I've kind of defrauded the university in any way, but some money has come to me that wasn't due to me. And in the case where I've spent some of it, like the degree to which I've been enriched has kind of changed, and that's why it becomes more complicated.
Crudely speaking, yes.
Yeah.
So most of these, so unjust enrichment cases are basically cases like mistaken payments under duress, where somebody's made you pay them, or undue influence, where you're sort of swayed, literally unduly, but by them. There's a famous case called Louth and Dipros where a man gives his mistress all of his property, but in fact she's a bit of a sort of grasping harridan. And when the scales fall from his eyes and he wants them all of it back, he can get it back.
Right.
Because she's basically influenced him to give him the money.
Okay.
So there's all cases in which there's basically a payment, or you receive money or property to which you're not otherwise entitled.
Yeah.
And you should give it back on that basis. Unless, as I say, there's some reason to think that you've justifiably disenriched yourself.
Yes. Okay.
Not realising that there's a problem in the first place.
Yeah, so that's what's happened in the case where I've spent some of the money not realising that it was a mistaken payment. I've disenriched myself. By spending. Yeah, okay. So, all right, so we've got two cases. We've got my salary payment. We've got the person with the mistress. So how does that one work? So the idea is that somebody's been kind of in some way influenced to give this person their money, but it's not fraud quite, but it's a kind of...
So we might imagine that this mistress is basically sort of given this guy to believe that she's going to leave him if he doesn't pay off a mortgage,
right,
or give her this expensive jewellery and so forth.
Okay.
And then, because when he realises that the only thing she's after is the money,
yes,
then the scales fall from his eyes.
Right. Okay.
He realises he's been influenced.
Yes.
Yeah? He's been manipulated, if you like.
Okay. Yeah.
But not technically fraudulently.
Right.
And therefore he can get the money back.
Okay. Good. And then, can we think of any other cases? So I take it the problem with, or one problem with this legal category is that actually there's quite a diverse range of different cases that are usually taken to fall under it, right? So what are some other cases of unjust enrichment?
So the three I've mentioned so far, right? The mistaken payments case with the university, the duress case where I basically make you pay. There's a famous case where somebody rings up their pet Yugoslav hitman, who then rings up the payon who says, "I'll kneecap you if you don't pay."
Right.
That's duress, or the undue influence cases. All of those are cases in which I deliberately pay you. I intentionally pay you. I intend to get the money out of my pocket and give you the £20 note or whatever it may happen to be.
Okay.
Other cases might not involve that.
Right.
So I might, for example, repair your car, thinking it's my car. So I'm not deliberately giving you anything because I don't know anything about you. I think it's my car. That's slightly different, but you can still see there's a mistake there.
Yes. So the question in that case is whether the car owner is liable to pay the person who's repaired the car
for
in exchange for repairing the car.
Basically, yeah. And that's how it's put in a lot of the cases.
Yeah.
That you can only get the car back, which is yours, if you give credit for the repairs.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you're not prepared to give credit for the repairs, I suppose you're not allowed to get the car back.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I mean, when I'm hearing some of these cases, I feel like at least my moral intuitions are a bit unclear on some of them, right? Like, it's not obvious to me that if someone repairs my car by accident, and it's nothing to do with, anything I've done, it's just a pure accident, then isn't that just, they should have been more careful about which car they were repairing? Like, should I really be paying the money? It seems it's not obvious to me that I'm liable for that, morally speaking.
Morally speaking, I think there's actually two different issues. The first one is actually that repairing a car's services are a bit different to my giving you money.
Yes.
So usually, if I clean your shoes, for example, and for whatever reason you like muddy shoes, because you would never have agreed to ask me or that I clean your shoes because you like muddy shoes, and you certainly never have agreed to pay me for that. Yeah. Should I be entitled to get money back from you? Well, in fact, The answer to that is no. I could be as mistaken as I like.
Yeah.
But the problem is you don't have to have the clean shoes. There's no law that says you have to have clean shoes.
Yes.
It's not really factually necessary because a bit of mud on your shoes doesn't stop them from working as shoes. You can still put them on and walk to work in them. So usually what we do is restrict those cases to where the enrichment is either factually necessary. I've fed your dog and the dog would have starved otherwise.
Yeah.
Factually necessary.
Right.
Or legally necessary.
Right.
So there are cases where directors have been appointed but actually invalidly.
Okay.
And they've done the work and managed the company and put submissions into company's house like they're supposed to and what have you. But they were invalidly appointed.
Okay.
But somebody would have legally had to do that work anyway, so the company must pay them.
Right, that makes sense. So I guess in the car case, there's a difference between where somebody mistakenly repairs my car, which wouldn't work without the repair being made, and let's face it, it's my car, I would have paid somebody else to do the repair if they hadn't done it for me. So actually, it's something that in that case, it's factually necessary in legal terms. A difference between that and, say, a case where somebody kind of, attaches a spoiler and some flashy, paintwork and stuff to my car. I take it in a case like that where it's not necessary and it's not something I particularly wanted, then I wouldn't be liable.
Then you wouldn't be liable. In fact, that's exactly the case I was thinking. Right. I was sort of go faster stripes. Being something that's not necessary.
Yeah.
In those sort of cases, the law insists that we both work on the assumption that I'm going to get paid for the work, and then you turn around and go, no, not paying.
Yeah.
The other problem that I alluded to is true of all mistake claims. It's that why should you care?
Yes.
I've paid you by mistake. Well, why are you not entitled to turn around and say, you're stupid?
Yeah.
Don't make mistakes. Not my problem.
Yes. Yeah.
And maybe we may pick that up later. I don't know.
I think we should do. Yeah. Okay. And then to return to the duress cases. So those are a little bit puzzling to me as well. Like, so in your example, somebody has a Lithuanian hitman. Was it?
He was actually Yugoslav.
Yugoslav hitman. Okay. So can see where what era the case is coming from. But yeah, okay, so an Eastern European hitman of some kind, and they're threatening essentially that hitman will pay this person a visit if they don't pay them a certain amount of money. But isn't that just like theft? I mean, is that any different from kind of mugging somebody? You're threatening somebody and taking their money.
So that example is obviously the most extreme example that I know of in the case law.
Yeah.
And that's called duress to the person.
Yeah.
And in most cases, certainly in these cases where I get some Yugoslav hitman to threaten to kneecap you, there's going to be a crime involved, and there's also going to be a tort.
Yeah.
Okay? And there's a bit of unjust enrichment. So there's three ways in which you can get a remedy. People are going to go to jail.
Okay.
There's a tort, there's a claim for breach of duty, and there's also the unjust enrichment cases.
Okay.
Slightly less extreme are the cases where we have a contract, and let's say it's to do my garden, and doing my garden becomes a bit more expensive than you thought it was going to be. Mm-hmm. Okay, and maybe the subcontractor doing the patio wants more money.
Yeah.
And you say, look, I can't do it for this price. Despite the fact that we've agreed this price, I want more. You want more for the same thing.
Yeah.
And I then agree to that because I really want my garden done.
Yeah.
Can that be enforced? These are, if you like, the sort of what we call the economic duress cases.
Okay. Yes. So there's a kind of duress involved there because the contractor's kind of holding over you the fact that your garden is not finished and using that to take.
And they're saying, I can't do it. I'll have to walk off the job.
Yes.
You have to get somebody else if you don't pay me extra.
Yeah.
And those cases don't need to be a breach of duty. In fact, sometimes they're not. There are cases, as I think about this question, to do with the blacking of ships, where the union, the maritime union, tells its members, don't sail the ship, and then tells the owner, we won't sail the ship unless you increase our wages.
Right.
And that's not at all.
Right.
Because they're protected by the trade union legislation.
Yes.
So yeah.
Right. Okay, so as I understand it, this category of unjust enrichment has proved a bit of a puzzle in legal scholarship, right?
Yeah.
It's people that have problems with it. So can you explain exactly why it's turned out to be so complicated?
Basically, the dispute is about whether or not you can take these cases and gather them all up into one separate area of law.
Yes.
Which, for better or for worse, we've decided to call unjust enrichment. Mm-hmm. Okay? Or whether or not we have to stick them, say, in property law or contract law, or maybe some of them in tort law, areas of law which are much more established, which basically everybody agrees there is such a thing as contract law, but not everybody agrees that there is such a thing as unjust enrichment law.
Right.
And basically, the dispute matters. Yeah. It's not just sort of arid, do we want to attach this label or that label to it? Because the way in which you think about it, how you gather cases together, and the criteria by which you do that can then influence what you think the answer should be in particular cases.
Right.
So the way that, if you like, the orthodox unjust enrichment people think about things is they say, okay, well, the way this works is basically you are unjustly enriched if A, you are enriched, B, you are enriched at the expense of the claimant.
Right.
C, there's some unjust factor. We've talked about some already, mistake, duress, undue influence involved.
Yeah.
And D, there aren't any defences.
Right.
I've mentioned change of position. And they say those four questions will give you the answer. Mm-hmm. And while I believe in unjust enrichment, and I think it is a category, I don't think putting them all together as that simple four-question analysis necessarily gives you the right answer.
Why not?
Let's take at the expense of.
Yeah.
You are in. I own a flat downstairs. This is an example actually from a Scottish rather than an English case. And I guess this may happen quite a lot in places like Edinburgh where there's lots of flats. I own the downstairs flat. You own the upstairs flat. Right? Heat rises, because that's just what heat does. So I turn my heating on, and I heat my flat. The heat rises through my ceiling, your floor, and helps to reduce your heating bills. You are enriched. Your heating bills are less than they would have been.
Yeah.
You are enriched at my expense, because I am partly paying for your heating.
Yeah.
Is there a cause of action? Can the downstairs owner get some of his heating bill back from the upstairs owner? Yeah. I suppose the downstairs owner might say, I was mistaken. I didn't realise it was going to reduce your heating bills because I thought there's a huge amount of insulation in my ceiling, your floor. I would have turned down my heating if I'd realised that you were going to get some. Therefore, you have to pay me. I think most people would think, hang on a minute, this is a fishing expedition and no mistake. Of course the upstairs owner shouldn't have to pay the downstairs owner. That's just life.
Yeah.
Get on with it. Deal with it. It's just life.
Yeah.
But once you sort of have that sort of unitary set of questions that you go through, and you treat all cases as being like that, then you get these problems of what I call overgeneralization or over-inclusion, and suddenly cases that should be obviously out become quite complicated. And you have to sort of scratch around thinking of what I think of as being absurdly implausible explanations of why there's no claim.
Yeah.
And usually people say the downstairs owner gifted the heat to the upstairs owner. No, he didn't.
Yeah.
He didn't at all. He didn't think about it. He just turned on his heating because he was cold.
Right.
And that, if you like, it's a case where things get weirdly complicated when they don't have to be.
Yeah. So the problem there has come from there's been an attempt to define a set of criteria, or we might say, in sort of philosophical jargon, necessary and sufficient conditions, i.e. conditions that have to obtain for something to be true, or conditions which, if they obtain, the thing will be true, for something to be an example of unjust enrichment. And in that case, it's that there's been enrichment, that it's at the expense of the claimant, that there's some unjust element, in this case a mistake, and that there is available some means by which the defendant could reimburse the claimant, right? So they've set out these conditions, and it's turned out that there's a case that intuitively most people would probably agree, the defendant shouldn't be liable, but which appears to fit those conditions. But is that just a problem with the specific conditions that have been identified? Would it be possible to find a better set of conditions that would exclude that type of case, but also include all the other cases that you set out before?
The answer to that, I think, is yes. But what it actually involves you doing is treating, rather than having one set of conditions that you want to apply to all of these disparate, diverse cases, is to look at the disparate, diverse cases as being disparate and diverse, and thinking, well, what sort of conditions should apply here?
Yeah.
So rather than being sort of top-down prescriptive, if you like, and say, here's a big idea, let's apply to everything. You work more in a sort of bottom-up fashion. What's actually appropriate on these facts?
Yeah.
And then I think what you find is you can still talk about at the expense of, if you want, because there has to be some sense in which it's come from the claimant.
Yeah.
But you're not saying all at the expense of cases have to have the same criteria.
Yeah.
You're having different rules for that depending upon the diverse factual scenario that you have.
Okay.
And if you do that, of course, and this is where the disagreement about the very existence of the subject matter comes in. Yeah. People say, well, if you do that, the anti-camp, if you like, the camp that says there's no such thing, this is all contract property and tort and other stuff. They say, well, now you're separating them out into diverse categories. You've just proven what we've been saying all along, which is they're all too different to be treated as being the same thing.
Right. So we should explain that the anti-camp, as you've described them there, that's people who say there's just no such thing as unjust enrichment. It's a category of law that we should just scrap altogether. Yeah. And they say that all of the cases where we ought to think that somebody should be liable to reimburse or whatever the person are going to be explicable on some other ground. So it's either going to be because there's some breach of some other legal duty or a contract or something else.
Something in property law. And they go further and they say that the pro-camp, if you like, who believe in this category of law, simply they're making life much more complicated than it needs to be. Yeah. As a result. And that you get wrong answers. Yes. Because of it. Yeah. Like the downstairs, upstairs fact thing. Yes. And that all of these cases can therefore be dealt much more easily and satisfactorily in the conventionally understood areas of law.
Yeah, and the problem you identified before is that if the pro-camp resorts to kind of trying to identify different sort of normative factors in each case in order to explain what's gone wrong and why the person is liable, the more diverse those become, the more the anti-camp is able to say...
They told you so.
Yeah, yeah. So there isn't a unitary category. You're looking for all these different factors in different cases. Okay.
And so much, if you like, of what I'm trying to do is to make an argument that despite the differences and the necessity of treating these different cases differently, they are similar enough that we should still collect them together in an overarching category.
Okay.
And that is actually helpful because it identifies similarities that do exist as being morally and normatively important to us.
Right. So
without insisting that everything be the same.
Yes. Good. Okay. Is this something that might make a difference to the verdicts that are reached in individual cases? That was what I was wondering. So, is it just? I mean, because is it just a matter of how we categorise these different cases? In which case, someone might say, "Well, who cares? Call it unjust enrichment or call it something else." But is it going to make a difference to the kinds of, judgments that might get handed down or whatever?
It's not, in that sense, just an arid definitional dispute over nothing. It can and it will make a difference to cases on the ground, I think.
Could you give an example of how that might work?
Maybe we won't talk about the problems of mistake just yet. But you'll remember when we started out with your being overpaid by your employer. Yeah. And I said, if you hadn't realised that you'd been paid by mistake and spent all the money, or some of the money at least, on new baby stuff that you wouldn't otherwise have bought, you might have a defensive change of position. Okay? So the defensive change of position is seen as being the typical unjust enrichment defence. Yeah. It's the typical defence that a defendant will raise to say, okay, I accept there was a problem, but I shouldn't have to give it back, or at least I shouldn't have to give all of it back. So one of cases that I haven't mentioned is that there's this device in English law called the trust, where I hold on trust for you. And many of the people watching this or listening to this podcast will be trustees without realising it, because every time you buy a house with your partner or somebody else, you are a trustee. Okay. So, sorry, guys. You're a trustee without realising it. But basically what a trust is a case where I'm managing property on behalf of you. Yeah. So I've got the ownership at law, but I can only do things with that property that benefits you as the beneficiary. There's a reason why we call it the beneficiary. Now, for whatever reason, I decide, okay, I'm trustee of this money for Jim, but I've actually decided to give it to my girlfriend for her birthday. Now, obviously, I'm not allowed to do that. I'm not authorised to give the money away to my girlfriend for her birthday. So the question then is, can Jim get the money back from my girlfriend? The answer is yes. Right. Okay. Obviously, you haven't actually paid her yourself. You don't know anything about this. I've paid her. So it's not the same as the cases where you actually pay somebody or do anything, in fact. If we think of that as being an unjust enrichment case, then my girlfriend, who knows nothing about the trust and just thinks I'm a rich bloke who's given her lots of money for her birthday and spends it on a holiday to the Bahamas that she wouldn't otherwise have taken, then when she comes back, is she entitled to say, sorry, Jim, I've changed my position thinking that it was my money? If we think of it as being an unjust enrichment case, the answer should be yes. And that should be true even if she spends other money that she has on the holiday to the Bahamas. Yeah. So long as she can say, I spent money on the holiday to the Bahamas. If you think of it as being a property law case, okay, and there's famous case about this, and whether or not it's unjust enrichment or property law, called Foskett and McEwen, which, in my view, wrongly says it's a property law case. If it is property law, change of possession doesn't apply. And she can't say, sorry, Jim, I've spent a lot of money on a holiday to the Bahamas, not realising that you were entitled to it. So that's just it. In this case, there's a concrete difference in the amount of money that she has to give back to you.
Okay, good. That makes perfect sense. Okay, so there is a reason why we might want to defend the idea of unjust enrichment if we think that kind of case is capturing something that's normatively important, and it's better for judgments to reflect those kinds of considerations, which might not be covered by other areas of law. Now, your answer to this challenge then is to bring in Wittgenstein, right? So you're saying that it's not that we're going to be able to set out a set of concrete conditions such that anything which meets those conditions is going to be an example of unjust enrichment, and anything which doesn't is not. You think actually it's going to be something more like what Wittgenstein called a family resemblance, right? So could you explain how that works a bit?
Wittgenstein wasn't a lawyer, and he didn't say anything deliberately about legal philosophy, but he has this example of games. And he says that games are like other things that we think of as being games.
Yeah.
Okay? They're different in some respects, but they're similar in others. So, football is obviously not the same as snooker, right? You've got 22 people running around a big field after one ball, and another you've got 2 people with long sticks hitting lots of balls on a table.
Yeah.
Okay, but there's similarities. There's 2 sides. There's a scoring system.
Yes.
There's a winner at the end of the game.
Yeah.
So there are similarities, even though there are differences.
Yeah.
And that's what he's getting at. What are the significant similarities that we think matter? There's 2 sides, a scoring system.
Yes.
Somebody wins. And therefore we can basically forget about the bits that are different that aren't as important.
Yes.
So that's what I'm saying about legal concepts, not just about unjust enrichment, but just about legal concepts generally. If you want to justify the creation or recognition of a higher level idea of unjust enrichment, that would include lower ideas like mistaken payments, mistaken repairs to cars, believing it to be your own car, duress, undue influence cases, the trust cases where I pay my girlfriend and gather them all together, then obviously there's differences between them. In some cases, I'm deliberately paying you. In some cases, I don't even know you exist because I'm deliberately trying to benefit myself.
Yeah.
In some cases, you'd have no idea what's going on because somebody else is benefiting somebody else.
Yeah.
So what are, if you like, the normative similarities which are important here? And can we construct that higher level idea while at the same time recognising the difference?
But presumably the family resemblance idea can't just mean that members of this category will be different in some ways, but they'll all have some things in common. Because, so for example, the games example that you cited there, okay, so in snooker and some other games, there are 2 sides and there's a scoring system, but it's not that a game is anything where there's 2 sides and a scoring system, right? Because, I don't know, solitaire, there's not 2 sides, but it's still a game. Something like competitive mountain climbing, there's not going to be a scoring system, but we might still want to call it a game.
And there, of course, becomes the question: Do we think games that you play on your own are games? Well, actually, I would probably agree with you that solitaire was a game. I'm not sure about the mountain climbing necessarily, in the modern era, I think I would say that the 100 metres was a game, because you can run the 100 metres on your own,
right,
without anybody there. You can climb a
Yeah.
mountain without anybody else being there.
yeah,
So I'm not sure I would call that a game.
yeah.
Maybe a sport, but not a game.
Okay, sure,
But
yeah.
but that does seem to illustrate the fact that you can
Yeah.
argue
yeah,
about what's significant and what's not significant.
yes.
And I think that is also important.
Yes, yeah.
Because there's a sort of iterative process in legal reasoning whereby we
Yeah,
come up with a concept and then we look down and go, oh, well, hang on a minute, that gives us the answer X here.
yeah,
But I'm really not sure that answer X is right.
yeah,
I'm really not sure that it's right to say that he should be liable or shouldn't be liable.
yeah,
And then that's where we scratch our heads a bit and think, well, should we go back up to the concept and twiddle with the concept a bit?
yeah.
Have we got the concept wrong?
Yeah. So the idea of family resemblances, as I understand it, the Wittgensteinian idea of family resemblances, is a bit controversial within philosophy, and it's not something I know an awful lot about. But I do happen to be reading a book at the moment, actually, by a philosopher called Bernard Suits, called The Grasshopper. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Which I haven't heard of. I confess.
Okay, so it's a book about games, actually. So he takes Wittgenstein's example of games, and actually what he says is, Wittgenstein says you can't set out strict conditions for what counts as a game or not. He says that's nonsense. What a game is a voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. Right, so he says actually you can define games, and he's very careful about kind of arguing for this. So you might agree or you might disagree, but there is a kind of controversy within philosophy about whether family resemblances really make sense as a way of kind of grouping things together. And actually, when you get into these cases, there might always be a set of conditions, and it's just difficult to find out exactly what they are. So actually, we should say that the reason he calls it a family resemblance is it's because it's meant to be like, families of people, right? You can say a group of members of a particular family look similar, but you might not be able to point to exactly what it is which links all of them together, right? That's the idea. That's why it's family. It's family resemblances. But yeah, so I suppose, how hopeless do you think it is to try to find, in the case of unjust enrichment, some set of conditions that's going to unify all of these cases?
I think it is hopeless to find one set of conditions, all of which will be present in all cases. What I don't think is hopeless is finding and identifying moral or normative reasons why person X should have a claim against person Y, and why, as a matter of positive law, we do give person X a claim.
Yeah.
Or maybe if we don't, we should. Or maybe even if we do, maybe we shouldn't.
Yeah.
But because there is a issues of person, I don't think it's hopeless to identify the underlying moral basis for particular claims.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, and I'm quite careful actually not to say, that in all cases of unjust enrichment, all of these conditions are met.
Mm.
Okay, what I want to say is we're looking for, in each case, significant normative reasons why there should be a claim.
Yeah.
And then we look across all of the cases that people say are in unjust enrichment,
Mm-hmm.
and we say, well, all of these are present in one case. Most of them are present in this case, but not all of them.
Right.
So
Yeah.
do we treat this case, where most of these conditions are met,
Yeah.
but not all of them,
Yeah.
as being within the group,
Yeah.
or not? That means, of course, that there are fuzzy edges, if you like, to the category.
Yes.
There are hard cases,
Yeah.
and actually the trust example where I hold on trust for you, but I give it all to my girlfriend, turns out to be a bit of a hard case, because it is so far removed from many of the other cases that are said to be an unjust enrichment.
Yeah.
But accepting that there are fuzzy edges, okay, and that there'll be hard cases where reasonable people can disagree on whether it's in or out, I think we can look to see if most of these conditions are met.
Yeah.
There's another analogy which gets trotted out by Wittgenstein and by some of the lawyers like Kit Barker and myself who believe in this idea, is the idea of a rope. Mm-hmm. So there are different strands of a rope, all of which hold it up, but you don't need all of them to be held up. So you can do without some of the strands, and it'll still be unjust enrichment. You'll still be held up by the rope.
Yeah. So in the rope analogy, you're going to need a number of strands in order for it to hold the weight, but it kind of doesn't matter which strands.
It doesn't matter which strands. Yeah. It sort of matters how many strands.
Yeah.
Because there comes a point at which you're going to say, this has to be something else.
Yeah.
Because you get one or two strands from here, but most of the strands are from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And that, of course, means that there's scope for argument and interpretation as to whether or not a particular case should be an unjust enrichment or in contract or in property law or in tort, for that matter.
Yeah.
I don't see the problem with that. I just think that's just how law works. Law just is a process by which we argue about what the best solution is.
I think it's just how concepts work in general, right? Most concepts are going to have edge cases and fuzzy boundaries. It's unlikely that any concept is going to be so hard-lined that it's going to be completely uncontroversial whether a particular case belongs to.
And certainly I think moral and legal concepts have these fuzzy edges.
Yeah.
And you can imagine concepts that really don't, like triangle.
Right.
Where you literally do have criteria. 3 sides,
Yeah.
angles must add up to 180 degrees. End.
Yeah.
And if that's not true, it's not a triangle.
Yes.
But we're not talking about concepts like triangle. We're talking about concepts like unjust and mistake and reliance, which have slightly fuzzier edges.
Yes. So I think philosophers are probably temperamentally quite comfortable with that kind of approach, but is that something that lawyers might find more troubling? I'm
going to say I'm going to give the sort of yes and no answer to that.
Right.
I think most lawyers wouldn't find that particularly bothersome because they just accept that you're going to argue and therefore there's going to be fuzzy edges.
Yeah.
The no part is, of course, there's a limit to how fuzzy your concepts can be. The fuzzier concepts, the less clear the answer should be. Yeah. The less clear what the answer should be, the less helpful the concept, the more likely you are just to make it up as you go along.
Yes, okay.
Which obviously poses a problem to legal certainty.
Yeah.
So I think they're going to say yes, but only to an extent.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think that's all we've got time for, but that's been a really interesting conversation. So Duncan Sheehan, thank you very much.
No, thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode of Ethics Untangled, please like and subscribe and recommend us to your friends. The podcast is edited by Mark Smith at Leeds Media Services, and our music is by Kate Wood. Ethics Untangled is brought to you by the Idea Centre, a specialist unit for teaching, research, training and consultancy in applied ethics at the University of Leeds. We offer master's programmes in healthcare ethics and applied and professional ethics, and PhDs available full or part-time and face-to-face or by online learning. We also offer consultancy and training services for business and the professions, including help with the difficult ethical issues faced by your organisation, commissioned research projects, and online or face-to-face CPD. If you'd like to find out more about these or any of our other activities, please visit our website at ahc.leeds.ac.uk/ethics.